Hey guys, RanterInShades here, exercising my first to memorize vlog style. Now while I was working on the Danny Phantom video, I came across an article on Facebook that was sponsored by a page. This was a few weeks ago, so I don't remember the name of this page. But the article is from ranker.com, written by someone named Jessica DeFino, called Rock Bands That Have Tarnished Their Legacies. I know people are probably going to point out that this is a subjective thing, and that is true, but when I looked at the article, I noticed a lot of problems with it, ranging from exaggerations to borderline misinformation, so I'm going to attempt to refute this article. The main problem I have with this article is its use of the phrase tarnishing their legacies. When I think of a band tarnishing their legacy, the first name that enters my mind, and probably yours too, is Ian Watkins, of course, but is Lost Prophets on this list?
No.
Another band I'm surprised isn't mentioned in this article is Great White. As much as I personally think that nightclub fire that killed 100 people in 2003, including their guitarist at the time, Ty Longley, doesn't affect the quality of their music, it definitely left a pretty messy stain on their legacy that still exists to this day. But they're not brought up either. What you're gonna see throughout this wine fest is Jessica DeFino exaggerate the shit out of some classic bands. Let's start with the introduction. And like I did the last time I made a commentary in Shades video, I'm gonna have my old pal text-to-speech read the article.
Even the most successful bands have had their share of problems. It's the nature of the beast.
This totally isn't gonna hurt some of your points later.
Personal tensions can become bigger than the music. The Beatles, the Beach Boys. The changing industry can prove challenging. Metallica, U2, or the lure of selling out can be hard to resist. Aerosmith's pop reinvention of the 90s. Whatever the reason, these are the biggest bands that ruined their legacy, to varying degrees. Oh, the price of success.
See what I mean? What she's describing by alluding to the names that she did doesn't sound anything like Ian Watkins, someone who actually did tarnish whatever legacy he had, by being a baby rapist. Or Great White, a band responsible for people dying. If dysfunction is really what tarnishing your legacy amounts to, it must be common as fucking music.
One, Hole. Their legacy, grunge rock band Hole, fronted by Courtney Love, left a lasting impression on the world. They are considered the most commercially successful grunge band with a female singer, and Love has made a name for herself as a feminist icon by becoming one of the first songwriters to touch on third-wave feminism with her raw lyrics.
I honestly thought she was more so remembered for being Kurt Cobain's wife, and not so much for the music, but what do I know, I never cared for Hole.
How they tarnished it. Controversy surrounded the group's 1998 album, Celebrity Skin, which credited Billy Corgan as a co-writer. Corgan stirred up drama by claiming to have written the entire album, but it wasn't until Hole went on tour to promote Celebrity Skin as the opening act for Marilyn Manson that the real theatrics began. Love and Manson could not get along or agree on tour costs, and Hole dropped out of the tour after only 9 shows. The band couldn't survive the fallout and officially broke up in 2002.
So because Courtney Love had drama with Billy Corgan of Smashing Pumpkins and Marilyn Manson, Hole's legacy is ruined? Do people seriously not listen to the music without thinking of this stupid drama from behind the scenes? Even if I was a fan of Hole, I think I'd still be able to enjoy the music without letting something this petty ruin it.
2. Oasis. Their legacy. Oasis is remembered anytime a frat bro picks up a guitar at a party. Their song, Wonderwall, is basically required learning for all newbie guitarists. Their Britpop sound and alt-rock hits reigned supreme in the 90s and 2000s. How they tarnished it. Sibling rivalry. Plain and simple. Brothers Liam and Noel Gallagher have never tried to hide their mutual contempt, trash-talking each other in interviews and even fighting during live appearances. Liam famously smashed Noel's guitar in 2009, and the band broke up for good.
Wow, you'd think there'd be a mention of their 1997 album Be Here Now that Todd and the Shadows covered in a Train Records video. Guess not. Again, how does this ruin the music? Yeah, it sucks that Liam and Noel stopped being able to get along, but you said yourself in the intro, dysfunction in a band is only natural. Even if you decided to include Dawkins on this list for that reason, which, spoilers, she doesn't, I'd still argue this point.
3. INXS.
Or, as I used to pronounce their name, INXS.
Their legacy. Australian rockers INXS were one of the best rock groups to come out in the 80s, and that's saying a lot. They popularized the new wave meets ska style of rock that no one else was making at the time. How they tarnished it. When lead singer Michael Hutchence killed himself in 1997, INXS took a year off from music. Totally acceptable. What wasn't acceptable, though, was how they found their new lead singer in a reality TV singing competition. This sell-out move all but ruined INXS's rock-hard reputation.
So So by your logic, Journey tarnished their legacy too, since they found their current singer, Arnel Pineda, through similar means. Yet no one calls Journey sellouts, and Journey isn't mentioned anywhere in this article. As I said in my word analysis about selling out, the only way INXS would be sellouts here is if they said they were against this stuff, which you're not providing evidence of being the case. And you're right, it is totally acceptable that they wouldn't want to do anything after dealing with something traumatic like losing a band member to suicide, or losing a band member in general. But here's the thing, many bands have decided to carry on with a new member after dealing with a loss. No one claimed AC/DC tarnished their legacy when they brought Brian Johnson into the band after Bon Scott died, or Alice in Chains with William Duvall after Lane Staley died, etc, etc. It doesn't impair your ability to enjoy the music they made with their original vocalist.
4. Guns N' Roses. Their legacy: 1 part hair metal, 1 part rock and roll.
Well, I don't really like calling them a glam band, since their sound is more gritty and bluesy than a band like Poison that had a very polished sound, but that's whatever.
Guns N' Roses made a name for themselves as one of the hardest rocking bands in town. The mastery of their instruments was unparalleled, and their live shows were something to see. How they tarnished it? Due to tensions between singer Axl Rose and guitarist Slash, GNR unofficially broke up in the mid-90s.
Which, as you established before, is natural.
The band decided to get back together since Slash in 2008 and released Chinese Democracy, which did well but still didn't meet industry expectations.
What does that mean? What are industry expectations? Because if Chinese Democracy sold well, which it did, regardless of whatever your opinion on the album is, wouldn't that be something the industry would want? This just comes off as you wanting to phone in your opinion about the album, which I agree, I don't care for the album, but your point is supposed to refer to sales.
In 2016, the full band reunited for a pretty disastrous tour.
If by full band you mean just Axl, Slash, and Duff McKagan, then okay.
Rose broke his foot during the warm-up show and had to sit on a makeshift throne to sing during the group's headlining gig at Coachella. The crowd consensus: Guns N' Roses should have left well enough alone.
Dave Jesus Grohl did the same thing in 2015 and no one complained about that, which is good because if they did, they should burn in hell. Also, I'm surprised you said nothing about Axl singing in AC/DC or the rip-off VIP package they had going on for the reunion tour in question. If you brought either of those up, I'd agree on the fact that they were lame, but I'd still ask, how does it tarnish the band's legacy or ruin the music? Did people stop trying to learn the intro to Sweet Child of Mine? Did stadiums stop blasting Welcome to the Jungle? No? So their legacy is fine.
5. Metallica. Their legacy: 1980s headbangers Metallica are considered to be one of the big four of thrash metal.
Considered? I think you mean to say are. It's common knowledge that the big four of thrash metal includes Anthrax, Slayer, Megadeth, and yes, Metallica. The only considering that takes place in these kinds of discussions is if there's a second big four, or if one of the big four should be swapped out for a band that's, subjectively, better. Exodus, Creator, Testament, Overkill, those are just a few names I see get commonly brought up in these conversations.
They built an underground cult following, and their first handful of albums were so critically acclaimed that Metallica became one of the first heavy metal bands to seep into pop culture consciousness.
I'd say Van Halen, Motley Crue, Def Leppard, Iron Maiden, and Judas Priest had them beat by at least a year or two. Hell, Quiet Riot released the first metal album to hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1983, the same year Metallica debuted. I'd say Metallica really gained momentum with Ride the Lightning, which came out a year later in 1984, and by then metal already was very much established in pop culture. Bands were having music videos shown on MTV, and Headbangers Ball didn't even become a block on the channel until 1987.
Even their band t-shirts are iconic and have been mass-produced by everyone from H&M to Forever 21. How they destroyed it? Metallica stood up to Napster in 2000 and sued them for sharing the band's music for free. While they eventually won their lawsuit, many fans saw the band's stand as hypocritical. Underground sharing was how they got their start. After all, Metallica's first post-Napster album, Saint Anger, alienated fans even more with a new sound, and they never recovered the popularity.
Never recovered the popularity? Are you kidding me? Both Death Magnetic and Hardwired to Self-Destruct charted at #1, and I saw them play live last year in front of a stadium that was filled to the brim. Bullshit, they never recovered their popularity. Say what you want about Death Magnetic or Hardwired, but these are facts. And yes, we get it, Saint Anger sucked and the Napster debacle was dumb. But as I proved, this didn't do shit to their legacy. They're still the biggest metal band on the planet, and their music is still beloved, or at the very least respected. Sheesh.
6. U2. Their legacy: U2 began as a couple of high school kids jamming out in Dublin until they leveraged their skills as musicians and songwriters to become one of the most successful bands in the world. They have won more Grammys than any other band, 22 to be exact, and have sold over 170 million records worldwide. How they tarnished it. In 2014, U2 basically tarnished all that they had built for themselves with the release of their 13th studio album, Songs of Innocence. On the morning of the release, all iPhone users woke up to find that the newest U2 album was part of their music library, whether they wanted it or not. How to remove U2 album became one of the most Googled searches in the following weeks, effectively tarnishing a legacy nearly 40 years in the making.
Oh yeah, I remember making a really off-the-cuff video about that. Good times. Good times. I don't think this did anything other than make U2 look bad for a little while, and even then, the majority of the people that were complaining about this were people that weren't even fans of U2, including myself. People stopped talking about it after about a couple weeks. That's not the same thing as tarnishing a legacy. If that were the case, I'd be hearing people talk about that publicity stunt all the time still whenever U2 is brought up in conversation, but that's not the case.
7. Aerosmith. Their legacy. 1970s rockers Aerosmith could hang with the best of them, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin. When it came to classic rock, Steven Tyler was a mesmerizing frontman, and the band rocked hard throughout the 80s. How they tarnished it. With the release of 1992's Get a Grip, Aerosmith was less rock and roll and more adult contempo.
You're joking, right? First of all, Get a Grip came out in 1993, not 1992. And second of all, adult contemporary? What, just because 3 of the singles that were released from the album were power ballads? Yeah, 3 ballads on an album is a bit pushy for me, but they're still good songs. Crazy is one of my all-time favorite songs of Aerosmith's, and Cryin' and Amazin' are okay too. Amazin' was, after all, the transition song and best songs of 2017. If Get a Grip just isn't an album you care for, that's fine, but don't guise that under calling it adult contemporary. If anything, the album's more bluesy than Aerosmith was typically known for being, and even then you could argue that they've always been bluesy. But regardless, even with 3 ballads, the album still has its rockers like Livin' on the Edge, Eat the Rich, Shut Up and Dance, which no, Walk the Moon did not cover, and Fever.
The album's 3 singles were all power ballads.
I literally just proved there were more than 3 singles from the album and that those other singles were rockers.
And the band ran with it, culminating in 1998's I Don't Want to Miss a Thing. A nice song, sure, but it put the kibosh on Aerosmith's legacy as classic rockers.
Did it really? I mean, it's not like it's unheard of for a hard rock band to write ballads. I don't see people saying that diminishes REO Speedwagon or Journey's credibility as a rock band. And if your response to that is,
well, they're not rock bands.
Shut up. Yes, they are. They have all the necessary characteristics of a rock band.
In the late 2000s, Steven Tyler even sat next to J-Lo at the American Idol judges table. If that doesn't scream softy, what does?
I'll admit, I was pretty perplexed when I first heard that Steven Tyler was going to be a judge on American Idol, but I eventually looked at that as American Idol getting a judge who actually had some musical credibility who might be able to say something legit. And even then, who actually said that Steven Tyler being a judge on American Idol ruined Aerosmith's music for them? Even that country single Steven Tyler released that I made a video a few years ago talking about couldn't do something on that kind of a scale.
8. Quiet Riot. Their legacy. Quiet Riot was the first heavy metal band to chart in the top 10.
And like we established earlier, they were the first metal band to have an album chart at number 1. Already I can tell whatever you're going to say about them that tarnished their legacy is going to be bullshit.
Their cover of Slade's Come On Feel the Noise granted them a spot in the rock and roll history books. How they tarnished it. Unfortunately, Quiet Riot just couldn't cut it with their own material.
Because people totally don't love songs of theirs like Bang Your Head, Metal Health, Danger Zone, Slick Black Cadillac, and Run for Cover. Yeah.
The band decided to follow up Come On Feel the Noise with a second Slade cover song, Mama We're All Crazy Now. 2 singles written by another band, not the best way to preserve your heavy metal legacy.
I agree that was kind of silly how obvious it was they were trying to replicate the success that they had with their cover of Come On Feel the Noise with another Slade cover with even goofier spelling on their follow-up album Condition Critical. But like I just said a little bit ago, people remember Quiet Riot more for Come On Feel the Noise and for Metal Health being the first metal album to hit number 1 than literally anything else. Not a whole lot of people outside of their diehard fans really care for their other albums, hence why I referred to them in my favorite quote one-hit wonder bands video as a one-album wonder. Also, I'm surprised you're not saying anything about the fact that Quiet Riot is still continuing on, with the only classic member in the band being their drummer, Frankie Banali. Even if you did bring that up, like with so many other bands mentioned in this article, I fail to understand how this completely destroys their music. Metal Health is still a classic landmark record in the history of heavy metal, and nothing can take away from that.
9. Queen. Their legacy. Queen will live on in pop culture memory as one of the greatest bands of all time.
Doesn't that sentence right there completely contradict the idea of their legacy being tarnished and thus defeat the purpose of having them on this list?
Their operatic arena rock sound was purely original, and singer Freddie Mercury was one hell of a dazzling frontman. How they tarnished it. After Mercury died of AIDS complications in 1991, the band decided to soldier on. They've regrouped with American Idol alum Adam Lambert at the helm, but without Mercury, Queen just isn't the same.
I'm basically sounding like a broken record at this point. Literally no one has ever said that Queen is tarnished just because Brian May and Roger Taylor chose to continue on with Adam Lambert singing. I agree that it's kinda silly, but this does not detract from my or anyone else's ability to enjoy Queen's music and belt Bohemian Rhapsody at any given moment. You yourself said that they will forever be one of the greatest bands of all time. Putting them on this list is completely pointless, and I can tell they're only on here because, oh, how dare they have someone singing with them that isn't Freddie Mercury. Adam Lambert is a pretty damn good singer who's just as flamboyant as Freddie was, so it kinda makes sense to me that they'd bring someone like him on board. I agree I'm not the least bit interested in seeing Queen live in this state, but as you yourself believe, this doesn't detract from their status as one of the greatest bands of all time. If it did, do you think the Bohemian Rhapsody biopic would even be made, let alone gross as well as it did at the box office?
10. The Beach Boys. Their legacy. When you think of California rock, you think of the Beach Boys. This Sun-Kiss crew invented a genre all their own with unique melodies, precise harmonies, and inventive arrangements. Their music influenced pretty much all rock music that came after them. Even the Beatles say the Beach Boys were an inspiration for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. How they tarnished it. The Beach Boys couldn't overcome personal tensions. They broke up and got back together countless times throughout their career because they could rarely agree on creative, business, or touring decisions.
And as you also stated in this article, that's pretty normal for a band to do. How does the business aspect of a band ruin the music? Do people still enjoy it for what it is? Yes? So shut up.
11. Black Sabbath. Their legacy. One of the best rock bands to come out of England in the 1970s, Black Sabbath popularized a darker, more occult version of rock and roll and are often referred to as pioneers of heavy metal. How they tarnished it. Sabbath was notoriously fronted by Ozzy Osbourne, whose struggle with drugs, alcohol, and crazy behavior, biting the head off a bat on stage. Anyone was responsible for the end of Black Sabbath, as they had come to be known.
Oh, you mean those antics that helped Black Sabbath create a presence for themselves on the scene?
The band fired Osbourne in the late 70s and never saw the same amount of success with replacement singers.
They still had success when Ronnie James Dio joined the band. People love the Dio albums. Some love them more than the Ozzy era albums. And me personally, I also enjoy their 1983 album Born Again that featured Ian Gillan of Deep Purple on vocals. Don't tell me you're someone that would complain that that album sucks just because the song Trash was on the PMRC's Filthy 15 list, and you'd use that as evidence that the Ozzy albums are objectively better. And this is coming from someone that does view the Ozzy era as being my favorite. Sure, I don't really care for the album Sabbath released after Born Again, but come on. Those albums don't outright ruin Sabbath, and you know it.
Osbourne has said, "What happened with me and Black Sabbath was that, in the beginning, we all had a purpose, but as it went along, that inevitable thing stepped in called ego. The fact is that success does change you."
And yet Black Sabbath is still heralded as being one of the greatest metal bands of all time, and Ozzy was still able to be successful as a solo artist. Success might change you, yes, but the music doesn't change, and the music is still much beloved. And finally,
12. The Beatles. Their legacy. Arguably the most famous rock band of all time, the Beatles started a full-on musical revolution when they rose to popularity in the 1960s with their unique brand of pop rock. The Beatles kick-started the British invasion and essentially changed the face of pop music.
Again, doesn't this completely defeat the purpose of including them on a list like this?
How they tarnished it. The Beatles couldn't survive success. The more decisions needed to be made, the more tensions rose creatively, financially, and personally. People loved to blame the breakup of the band on singer-songwriter-guitarist John Lennon's love interest, Yoko Ono.
And I'm among those people. That's why I always say if you're wanting to be in a band and be in a relationship, your partner needs to be really cool with it and not be a controlling bitch.
But Ono has said, I don't think you could have broken up four very strong people like them even if you tried, so there must have been something that happened within them. Former Beatle Paul McCartney agrees. He says the four members just wanted different things.
But that doesn't change the fact that Yoko Ono at least played a part in the fallout of the Beatles. Creative differences certainly played a part in it too, since thanks to Yoko, John was developing an interest in creating avant-garde bullshit. You can tell this just by looking at what all four of the Beatles did when they first went solo, or even looking at some of the Beatles' latter output. Eventually, John got his groove back in the 70s, and Paul and George were also releasing some good stuff. Paul is actually my favorite solo Beatle. What? As hectic as I'm sure this was for everyone who was a fan of the Beatles in those times or knew them personally, this did not tarnish their legacy! The Beatles are still regarded as music legends and some of the most influential people in history. This entry was doomed from the start. Thanks for listening to me bitch about this stupid shit, guys. I'm fine with deferring opinions on the bands in question here, but I get really annoyed when people ham it up like this for clicks and exaggerate information. You may not agree with some of the actions or decisions made by these bands, I certainly don't, and you might not like certain songs or albums of theirs, be it an album that's commonly regarded as an abomination like Saint Anger, or an album like Get a Grip that I find to be great, but their legacies are not tarnished, and I doubt they ever will be. I'm Shades, and I'll see you next time.